Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us at the 2023 World Child Hunger Summit. You all just came from a session with some of our amazing youth advocates, and now we're going to take that same energy and bring it into the school cafeteria. This is our session from cafeteria to conversation, integrating student perspectives into your school meal program. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started here today. This session is being recorded. All the recordings will be available along with slide decks and any other materials on the attendee hub, and then also on No Kid Hungry Center for Best Practices website. Language translation is available. There's a phone number you can call that you'll see on the attendee hub, and I'll drop into the chat here as well if you would like to hear live Spanish interpretation. There will be a Q&A session at the end of today's presentation, so please put any questions for our panelists into the chat, into the Q&A, and we will make sure to address those. And with that, I'd like to introduce one of my colleagues, Sam King. She's a senior manager for our program innovation team here at Share Our Strength. And Sam, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Hi, everyone. So happy to be here today and to share some of the lessons we've been learning about engaging with youth and some of the tools that we've been using. Next slide, please. Okay, so the first portion of the session is going to be about using the principles of human-centered design for student engagement. While we're getting settled, please make sure that you have a pen and paper because we're going to be reflecting at different points throughout the presentation. So I want to make sure that you're ready for that. And then I'm also going to ask one of my colleagues to paste a link in the chat to this online guide that we will be referencing throughout the conversation. Next slide, please. Great. So what are we going to be doing today? We're going to start with trying to situate this work in challenges and opportunities that you're facing in your schools by asking some questions about what matters most to you. Then we'll do an overview of the School Meals Design Guide, the online hub for tools and resources to improve student participation and engagement with community members and family. We're going to do a brief observation practice, and then my colleague Ria is going to talk to you about surveys and focus groups. And then at the end, we'll just start thinking about how you can get started using any of these tools in your cafeteria. Sure, let's dive in. Okay, so here's what I'm going to ask you to first start using your pen and paper. I would love for you to take a moment now to reflect on an issue or an opportunity in your meal prep program that you want to better understand. You feel free to put it in the chat, but let's just take 1 minute and then we will move on, and I will share some illustrative ones as well. Okay, so just to think more about this, I'm really curious what brought you all here today. Is there a particular issue that is really rising to the top for you? And you can share those in the chat, or we will move on in just a second. And I have some sample ones for you. Okay, next slide, please. So here are some of the common challenges and opportunities that we hear from FNS teams across the country. And I wonder if any of these resonate with you, or if you've tried to address any of these by engaging students or caregivers. First one, why is breakfast participation so low? Second, what is preventing families from accepting food benefits? Third, why are so few free and reduced price meal forms being completed? And fourth, how do we adapt the meal program to reflect the diversity that is growing in our district? Does this resonate with any of you, any of these challenges that you've faced? You'll see that they're all different levels, and why is breakfast participation low is kind of an overarching question, down to why are the free and reduced price meal program forms being completed. So you can use these tools that we're going to share for any level of a question. Okay, let's move to the next one. So now that you have an issue identified, and it could be breakfast participation, or it could be increasing the cultural relevance of your meal program. You want to be clear about what you know for a fact, what your assumptions are, and what questions you're going to bring to the conversations with students or the surveys of students. So what you know for sure is, for example, participation rates are low, then you have a statistic. So that is for sure. A second assumption would be, what do you think is driving that? So oftentimes we hear people say, I think the students don't get here in time for breakfast. And that may be completely correct, but there also may be a couple of other things that are driving that student's behavior and decisions not to eat lunch or breakfast. They could not like the way it looks. They can tell you that they would rather socialize with their friends and they don't feel like they have time for breakfast, even if they get there on time. So that's where you really can kind of get into the why is this behavior happening and what can you maybe do about it that would be creative. And lastly, as you're starting to frame up your engagement, you'll also want to just jot out questions of what don't you know? What are you hoping to learn from the students? What are their preferences? What are they interested in? Who are their influencers? These are all things that you may not know and would be really interested to learn from students. Next, we're going to explore how to learn more and test your assumptions. So this is the resource, and I can't see the chat, I don't think, but hopefully we have put the link in the chat. But we've created this. Okay, great, thank you. We've created this school meals design guide, which is an online hub for information, tools, and resources that F&S teams can use to better understand their community's needs. It's also guidance on how to design with your community and for your community from start to finish. And it's resources to make tangible user-centered improvements to the meal program. And I want to stress again that this has been made for F&S teams and from their perspective. And if you go to the next slide, the guide is based on, and a lot of the approaches that we use here at No Kid Hungry and Center for Best Practices are based on the design process that the Stanford Design School developed many years ago, primarily for commercial operations and industry, but very relevant in the social space as well. This is the first time that we're adapting it to the school food context. So design thinking is a way of creating products, services, and programs that put an understanding of the user, and in this case, the student's life experience at the center of the process. This design process you see here was created by Stanford, as I mentioned. The first step is empathizing with people you are designing for. What are the challenges that they face in daily life? What could make their experience better? What are they proud of or gets them energized? And we will be talking a lot today about tools that you can use in this part of the process. Empathizing, learning about students, learning about what drives them, learning what aspirations they have for their experience at school meals. Secondly, the next step is to define your key questions. And I started talking a little bit about that already. So for example, the No Kid Hungry team is working with a district that is considering the question of how might we design a cafeteria experience that feels like luxury. And that question can animate the ideation and the prototyping and testing that comes next. So ideating is when you brainstorm and create ideas with your teams and even students. I think this is what we're really excited about now, is starting to co-create with students and caregivers or other community members. What are ways to address this question around luxury, or question around participation, or question about where we put the breakfast cart in the school. The prototyping phase, you want to do quick, easy to test ideas. So maybe putting a grab and go cart in a different location. It's not a lot of investment in infrastructure or resources, but it gives you a very good feedback on how it's working before you invest more. And then test is what I've been already started getting into. And so we've created tools and processes for all of these steps with the FNS context in mind. Next step, please. Great. Okay, so we're going to talk about what's in the guide, and I encourage you all to take a look at it and peruse while I'm talking. And we're also extremely open to feedback. It's going through a revision right now. So love ideas that you might have of tools to include or ways to organize it. So currently it's organized in with 3 demographic groups and 1 group on human-centered design 101. So the first one is activating students, and these are activities and tools that you can use to welcome students into the school meal process. It has tools like how do you source recipe ideas for culturally relevant foods, to surveys. Ria's going to be talking a little bit about surveys later. And then engaging caregivers, making space for caregivers to share their perspectives and passions. I don't know about you all, but sometimes when I talk to caregivers, it's clear that they don't really know much about the meal program. And so bringing them into that process can be really rewarding. Connecting with community. This is an opportunity to, these tools help you to expand the narrative of what school meals are. People have a very fixed notion in their mind of what school meals are based on their past experience, and being able to kind of explain what you're doing in the program, what some of the limitations are and what some of the opportunities are, can be very helpful. And then finally, the human-centered design 101 process. So for those who are interested in kind of coming up with an idea and tracking it all the way through to a new product or service or opportunity for kids, you can use this process. These are the basic steps of it, customized for the school food experience. Okay, so let's try some of these empathy approaches that I mentioned before. So there's so many ways to get feedback from students, caregivers, and your community members. And I think probably many of you have tried some of these. I would imagine that polling and surveying are pretty familiar to you all, but maybe you haven't tried them at all with students, and that's why you're here today. So we want to share some opportunities for you to explore, to work with those. So a poll is pretty self-explanatory. It's when you want to take a temperature check of how kids are feeling about a particular meal, or just one item really that you want them to give you feedback on. Surveys are a great way, either virtually, with a QR code, or written out survey, are a great way to get information from a big group of students. It's not very nuanced, but it will provide you with a very good bird's eye picture of how they're feeling. Observation is another way. This is something that we're going to get practice today. It is observing behaviors of students, in this case, in the cafeteria, or as they come to school, or as they interact with teachers in breakfast after the bell. It gives you a very good different perspective, actually, than you might have as the FNS director or FNS team member. Focus groups, we will also talk a little bit about that, how you set up conversations with students, in an intimate setting. So for like 4 to 5 students, they're great for dissecting a particular issue or question, and kids will bounce ideas off each other, and it can be very dynamic. Interviews are obviously one-on-one sessions, and you can go even deeper. And then also we do encourage other ways of getting feedback. So you can use art as a way to channel creative energy of students, and also kind of to provide you with some beautiful artwork for your cafeteria in the hallways, and really any other sort of collaborative forms of expression. Okay, let's go to the next page. Okay, so this is an easy poll that you can use, and the design guide has a whole bunch of variations of this, and you could even think about just using the frowning face on the left-hand side and the green face on the other side to gauge satisfaction with a particular meal or a particular suggestion around, if you have a lot of ideas of different meals that you want to bring in, you can ask for their perspectives on whether or not they would taste it. Let's go to the next one. Okay, great. So this is where we're going to get sort of a deeper practice on ethnography or student, learning through observation. And what I would like you to all do is, what we're going to do is that, please bring out your pen and paper. What we're going to do here is we're going to actually watch a clip of a video. Yeah, we can go to the next page. This is a method that is used in social sciences all the time. And it's really to provide you with a different perspective on something that you're very familiar with. And so when you're watching this clip in just a few minutes, I want you to think of yourself not as an FNS director, but as a small child coming in this cafeteria for the first time. And just write down in chronological order, without any sort of interpretation or judgment, what you see. And then once we're done with it, I'll ask you to just continue writing, give you a few more minutes to write down your thoughts. I will ask you to interpret those, and then we will talk about different actions that we might want to take in order to kind of test any notions that you have about why certain things are happening. So got it? It's going to be like a 5-minute video, and very excited to get your thoughts and for you to experience this. So if we can turn that on.
No, this is his school. No, I'm saying you got Glory. You got Glory. Oh, yeah, her for the video. Ready to line. You need help? You got it? Nope. You need some help? All right, now open it up. Sit it back. Yes, I am coming. Good job. Awesome. Let me see you try to open it up. Pull it. Pull it. Nope. Go with the arrow. But it's not good ice. It's not for your juice. It won't go in there. Say, don't say anything at all. It's all right. You'll be fine.
Okay, I'll give you a few more minutes to wrap up what you're thinking, and then we're going to move on to the reflection part. You can change the slide. And this set of worksheets is on the design guide, so you can access it there, but it's pretty straightforward as a series of questions. Okay, let's change the slide. Okay, now is when you can bring your judgment into this. So what is your interpretation or analysis of what you just observed? Did the kids seem to like the food? Did they enjoy the environment? Was service efficient? Did anything surprise you? Was anything particularly difficult or pleasant to see? What went well? What do you wish were different? I'll give you a minute or two, and then I'll share some of my observations. Okay, one observation that was just shared is that it would be great to see adults eating along with students as role models. I know teachers need a break and don't know how to make it happen. Yes, that is a big challenge, trying to figure out how to get the teachers involved. One of the other things that I observed was that the packaging was somewhat difficult. I think that that's probably related to the pandemic and maybe is not an issue anymore in that particular school, but how can you maybe try different ways of presenting the food so that it's easier for kids to actually get into it while being safe and hygienic. And I did see that there were members of the staff who were being very helpful with the kids and helping them open their milk and their bananas and whatnot. And it makes me wonder if we could have some form of pilot where we're encouraging that sort of behavior. Another one with sensory overload. Yeah, that's cafeterias can be very overwhelming. I hear you. And then we see a great variety of fresh fruits and vegetable options, and the kids were actually choosing them. Kids had to stick their hands in the ice to get food, which is not very pleasant. And you probably heard one of the ladies mentioning to the kid that they couldn't put it in their drink because it wasn't for drinks. I'm curious for you all to reflect on just how it was to observe a cafeteria in this manner. So a place that you're very familiar with, but to see it through a lens of inquiry. We can move to the next slide, I think. All right, so the last part of this process is to think about future actions. Did your observation inspire you to want to make any changes to your meal program? And in this case, what we can reflect on is, are there any sort of pilots or changes that you would recommend in this context, in the cafeteria that you saw? So one that I think would be interesting is just experimenting with the seating arrangement so that it's an efficient format, but that kids have more opportunity to socialize and to see how that would work. It may not work at all well, given how rambunctious little kids are, but I think there's some opportunity to experiment. Okay. Let's move to the next. Okay, so one thing that we one of the approaches that we mentioned before is the focus group approach, which is really helpful at kind of getting at ideas that student, like coming up with kind of creative ideas with students. And one thing that we've tried as a team here is to help ground the students or even parents before you have that conversation. I'm sure that many of you have been in conversations that are just kind of a negative spiral, but here we're trying to get kids to reflect on what they like about the experience, what could be better, and sort of what questions that they might have coming into a conversation with an F&S team or their proxies, so that they understand that you want to change. There are things that you're interested in changing, and you acknowledge that not everything is perfect, and that you're open to constructive criticism. I think going into those conversations too, you might want to not make them so open-ended. Ria's going to talk more about this too, but one thing to consider is, can you move beyond, do you like the food, not like the food, into, all right, well, we know as an F&S team that we can change packaging. And so that is something that could be discussed, versus we can't right at this time think about reconfiguring the way the cafeteria works or the way the line works. So if you can kind of come up with a couple of ideas of areas where the kids could focus their energy, that can be very helpful as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's another tool from the guide, and you can do so many variations of this, to ask kids to draw what they like on the left, and that I'm sorry, this one is draw the food that they like on the left or the cafeteria that they like on the right. You can do it in a different way where you ask them to draw, you know, what would be their ideal meal, and then what would be the worst meal they have. But there's so many ways to do this, and it's really fun to get kids drawing and thinking creatively. And you also can get some nice feedback on what they like, as well as artwork for the cafeteria. All right, next slide. Okay, coming back to the design process, I mentioned that we were going to look at some of the empathy approaches, which we just have. We're not going to have a lot of time. We don't have time to go over all the rest of them. But I do want to stress that you're going to get a lot of information if you do like a survey and an observation and maybe a focus group. You'll have a lot of information and lots of different ideas about what to try and what not to try. So you'll want to kind of continue to iterate and come up with ideas with your team that you can try, and think through prioritization, right? So some of these things will be easy fixes, like I would like a different condiment at the condiment bar, and others will be pretty massive, like reconfiguring the layout at the cafeteria. Both of those are very valid and important suggestions, and you can just think about them in slightly different ways, where you're able to do some things short term, and then you can kind of plan for the long term changes that you would like to make with the students' support. Okay, let's go to the last slide. Okay, so as you're thinking about getting started, and I really wish we were in person so we could talk to each other about this. I'm feeling very disconnected right now, but because I think this is really something that's really fun to just brainstorm around. But if you're want to get started and try, and you've not done anything with students before, you want to determine what you want to understand better and which community is your priority right now, which we started doing with that reflection exercise at the beginning. Second, you want to take an inventory of all the ways you could use to get student or parent feedback and figure out the easiest way to do it. So is there already a school survey, like a district-wide student survey or a district-wide parent survey, where you can add on some questions from the FNS perspective? Are there football games that everyone comes to that you can go and bring a food truck or just a table and start interviewing kids or parents? Back to school nights are a great opportunity to introduce the food program to parents, get their feedback, see who is really excited about the program, and get them involved. So there's a whole host of ways to do it. You don't necessarily need to do something brand new. Definitely try to make it easy for you because you have already so much to do, and find out ways that you can kind of slot in your questions to existing systems. And then, lastly, think about, actually, can you go back on? Yes, thanks. Lastly, who will be in charge of getting and implementing feedback? So are you yourself going to do it as an FNS, in the FNS team? Is the whole team going to be responsible? Can you liaise with student leadership, for instance, or a community group? Is there already a student group that's interested in food justice that could be kind of your eyes and ears on the ground and conduct some of these conversations with their peers? And then how will you get this feedback? Is it survey? Is it a poll? Is it something that is more a verb, like a presentation from students? These are all sort of things to think about as you consider what approach you want to take. Next slide, please. So I think we can come back to these questions. How are you going to get started? What questions do you have? These can be for the Q&A section. And now I can turn it over to Ria. Thank you, everybody. Please use the School Meals Design Guide and get in touch. There's also a survey that for those of you who feel like you've gotten student experience down pat, we'll share the link for it, but would really be happy to receive any information you have about your program and how you are working with students. And now I will turn it over to Ria, and then we'll come back to the discussion questions later. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. I am Ria. I work as the Senior Manager of Youth Engagement and Empowerment at Share Our Strengths. I'm really excited to talk to you a little bit more about some of the things that Sam talked about and our new resource that we launched literally last week. So this is hot off the press. And we could go to the next slide. And it's all about gathering student feedback. So it's a toolkit with a bunch of resources that I'm going to talk you through today. And I'm just really excited to get to speak with you all about my favorite topic, which is student engagement. Next slide, please. So why should we gather student feedback? Sam talked about a lot of reasons why and a lot of ways to do so, but we actually conducted a study last year to confirm what we were thinking, that student feedback is important, but we found out that 87% of teenagers ages 12 to 18 are more likely to participate in school meals if they knew that their school gathered feedback from students and how to improve those meals. So by gathering student feedback, this is a great opportunity to get student input and recommendations to help increase that student engagement in school meals and overall improve program participation. Next slide, please. So Sam talked about this already, but start with a survey. Surveys are so great and have just a lot of opportunities to adjust questions, to think about different ways to implement the survey, different audiences that you want in different languages. And so they provide an opportunity for pointed feedback. You can make them as specific or as general as possible. There's the ability for them to be anonymous, so there's not any pressure or repercussions of, you know, if I share what I really think, will I get in trouble? Which is something that sometimes can enter a student's brain if they're thinking about giving feedback. You can ask a larger audience, you can promote them widely with a QR code. And there's just a lot of different ways to use surveys. I am going to talk a little bit about the school that we worked with, Greensboro Public Schools in Virginia, where we actually started with a survey. They knew that they had lower participation rate amongst their high school students in breakfast and lunch. And so we wanted to figure out how we can help increase that participation and what are some of the challenges that are occurring. So we actually have 2 sample surveys in the resource, one in English and one in Spanish. And it has questions of like, how do you feel about the meals? What words would you use to describe meals? How do you like the way they're being served? You know, is there anything that we could change? And then at the bottom of it, we actually allowed students to identify if they wanted to engage in student listening sessions down the road. And so that actually helped us identify a group of students who were willing to speak to us and participate in a listening session, which sometimes we call a focus group, but I just like to call it a listening session because that's what I was doing. I was listening. So we can go to the next slide. So the listening session. So this format allows students to discuss their thoughts and beliefs with a facilitator and their peers, helping students expand upon each other's ideas and even voice differences and opinions. So I'll talk a little bit about the different resources that we have in the toolkit for the listening sessions. But the first question that we should be asking is who should be involved? So I always think about stakeholders as like the WIFMs, like what's in it for me. And so when we're thinking about the different groups that are involved, we should think about the nutrition team, right? Who is responsible for the success of child nutrition? The program administrators, who is responsible for the implementation of child nutrition programs? Thinking about a facilitator, who will act as a facilitator for the discussion? And then thinking about your students as your program participants and your group participants for the discussion. Next slide, please. Okay, organizing the sessions. So after a lot of trials, we've kind of figured out that an ideal session has 5 to 8 students and lasts for 45 minutes. It's really helpful to compensate your participants. We gave each of our participants a $30 gift card for their time. It's really important to create a brave space for discussion and address power dynamics that can occur in these settings. We have a specific resource in the toolkit that's just on power dynamics and thinking about how can we have conversations that are fruitful and also easy to have. I know I talked about like intimidation previously in the surveys of, can it be intimidating to fill out a survey and knowing that there's repercussions if your name is involved, right? Well, in a listening session, you are there and you are providing your feedback and there is your name associated with it. But how do we create that to where you're still protected, you're still able to share what you want, and it's not being, sent to the school as like, oh, Johnny said this, right? Or thinking about having a facilitator who's an adult who's leading the discussion. Being in a school, there's already power dynamics involved between adults and students. So how do we bridge that gap? How do we create a space where that is more inclusive, that is easier for students to talk to, and really feel like they're heard in that environment? And then, of course, using a discussion framework to help move the conversation along. So we have a discussion framework in the toolkit, and that has all of the different types of questions based on like breakfast, after school, lunch, stigma, just all of these different questions that you can use and pull from to help guide the conversation. I always think less is more when it comes to asking questions, really trying to narrow down on specific subject areas, but not just drilling them, because if you wanted to do that, you could just use a survey. So trying to keep as much conversation available for like open-ended communication and constructive feedback versus just drilling a bunch of questions. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is kind of a quote from our partner in Greensville Public Schools, and she just said, the school nutrition director said that using No Kid Hungry allowed us to get a true student perspective without students being reserved with their opinions. Based on the feedback, we reached out to one of the trusted teachers at the high school, and we increased breakfast participation in one day. So this was a really fun listening session to do. We had about 5 students in each session, and one of them just kind of said, oh, if this teacher told me to eat school breakfast, I would eat school breakfast. And we're like, oh, okay. And then all of the other students were like, yeah, this teacher rocks. Like, I really would eat breakfast if he specifically told me to eat breakfast. So we went back, we took that feedback, and the school nutrition director immediately implemented it and talked to that teacher. And every morning in the gym, he started asking people to take their school breakfast and start eating it. And I think they raised the number in one day. They increased by like 51 students, the number of people who were taking breakfast. And one of the takeaways that I really appreciated from these listening sessions in general is that the students themselves told us that they felt heard, and that was really important to them, that we took the time to talk to them and that we listened and they felt heard in the process. And I think that's an outcome of student feedback and listening sessions that is just really great to have, and knowing that a student can walk away and feel like their input matters, and that being a change that they can make in their school participation is just really exciting. Next slide, please. Okay, so I talked really fast and there's definitely a lot of things inside this toolkit that I would love to go through, but I think it's easier just for you to walk through it. A link is available online. It's on the Center for Best Practices, and it really does go in, and it starts with the survey. What do you need to create a survey? How do you promote a survey? What are some options that you have to copy and paste questions? And then it goes into, okay, you have a group of students that are interested. How do you facilitate these meetings? How do you have this conversation? How do you get buy-in from the principals, from the teachers, from the students themselves? And then how do you actually conduct the conversation? And then what do you do after you've received the information? And there's examples of just the resources we've created based on student input. And so there's a lot of great information in there. And I think between this toolkit and then Sam's School Meals Design Guide, I really think there's just so much to do. And of course, like Sam and I are here if you need help refining or have like specific questions or even have suggestions for improvement, of course. We're always listening. That's it.
Thank you so much, Ria and Sam, for sharing your expertise in this area and talking to us about how to engage students in the cafeteria and in their classrooms around participation in breakfast, school lunch, all these programs. I want to remind the audience that you can ask any questions of these two in our Q&A feature, so please be dropping those questions in there. But in the meantime, I had a couple of questions that came up while listening to you guys. I think firstly, one that might resonate with a lot of our audience too is to you, Ria. You mentioned that your focus groups, your listening sessions were with high school students and based within that kind of age range. Do you think that a lot of these practices can be applied to other age ranges? And are there any modifications you might make to make it more suitable for younger audiences?
That's a great question. I want to just kind of preface that we chose high school students specifically because the participation rate dropped so drastically from elementary to middle and then middle to high school. And so we really wanted to focus on this age range, thinking about how students in general, like what is that participation gap? Why does it drop so drastically? And so that's why we started with high school students, but my work specifically works with around 12 to 18, just because we've got some really great colleagues that focus on elementary age students. And so I really wanted to kind of think about the demographic where the participation drops off and there's not as many people focused on that area. So I actually do think that everything that we've provided can be used with middle school age students as well. I think it's super easy to adapt the questions. It really is a plug and play model. And so it's based on kind of like that open-ended style of like, how do we get the conversation started? What do we do? And so the questions are adaptable. And like I said, they don't have to be like the survey questions. I think some of them are like, what words do you associate with your school food, right? It could be like healthy, fresh, not great, like things like that. And I do think it is adaptable for middles to high school. I think it is a little bit harder for elementary age students, just because the dynamic is different. But I do think that there are some things that Sam introduced that are applicable. And I think like I've seen so much success in like smiley face surveys and so much stuff for like drawing what they think about. I'm speaking for Sam, but I think there's just tools that she has in her toolkit as well that are applicable to younger kids.
I think that's a great plug, that these two resources really work well hand in hand with each other. I know from my experience working with community gardens as well, we had so many surveys that were like, draw strawberries and color in the number of strawberries for how much you enjoyed this meal. So I definitely think using, like Sam, you were mentioning, those kind of art-based ways of expressing are really great with those younger audiences. Sam, anything you would call out for like specifically being great on those, or we covered it?
Yeah, I think you covered it. I think we've had like success also with like movement as well with young kids, like go into that corner if you like bananas or apples, and so that seems to get them excited also. But the art and the sort of simplified, ways of showing a preference tend to work well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I never thought about movement, but you see that done with adults too, where it's like stand on the line if you agree or disagree. And it's a great way, of getting people up and moving and thinking as they're engaging with this. Another question I had for you both is, we know that schools are very, their student bodies are very cyclical. You're coming in, you've got a whole new student body, in high school at least every 4 years. And a lot of these resources and what Ria, you were saying of the students just like being heard. How often do you think it would be important for school nutrition directors and others in the administration to be checking in with their students? How frequently do you think some of this work should happen?
If I designed the perfect world, it would be a continuous feedback loop. So it would start with a survey, maybe a pulse survey every quarter or every semester, depending on the school, and then having a listening session that goes in with that, but then making sure that that is not the only place for conversation. And so having the school nutrition team actually building relationships with the students that they receive feedback from. So if they can pulse check later and say like, hey, or keeping the survey up year round so then people can submit their responses regularly. I think Sam and I were part of a conversation with students and they were like, why can't we have like every day at your school, like have a smiley face or a frowny face based on like what you did or what you thought about the meal, and just having something like that up all the time. And so really reinforcing and creating that feedback loop of like, hey, we constantly want to know what you're thinking and we're always iterating and going to be thinking about it. But I think it's also really helpful for a school nutrition team to be realistic and saying like, hey, we can't make menu changes overnight. Like our menu changes are on this cycle because of this. Like maybe at that point where we're starting to think of the next menu that we can engage in feedback. So it does take that like conversation of like, when is it most feasible to take input and apply it versus when is it accessible to get information. I think like you can't do a focus group every week, like that's not going to happen, but by creating regular opportunities for feedback and like making sure that students know that it's happening, I think that really creates that feedback loop and that cycle over time, that even though, right, it is cyclical, even though students are phasing out, I think the students like, if it's ongoing and it's not just a one-time thing, then it doesn't matter if the students are graduating, right? Like their input still matters. And I think one of our focus groups was with a graduating senior, and he had like so much to say and he was so excited, and he was like, I've been waiting all 4 years for someone to ask me these questions. And he just like lit up and it was amazing. And he like encouraged other students in the group to speak up too, and it was just really great to see that. And he was one of the ones who was like, I feel so heard, like thank you so much. And he was graduating, he knew that like the input or his feedback wouldn't apply to him directly, but he was so excited to share it that it's still, and knew that it was applicable in the next school year and things like that. So I don't want to deter anyone from not reaching out because of that, if that makes sense.
No, that's fantastic. And I love that advice of there's low level lifts of those like constant surveys, those just checking in points on like, did you enjoy this meal or did you not, that you can do all the time. And then the larger portions that you can plan around any strategic planning you're doing. Sam, anything you would add to that or?
I would just add, yeah, I agree with everything Ria said. One of the things, in addition to like input and perspective, you can kind of take it further and have the kids kind of involved in some co-creation of solutions, which will be a opportunity to get them to be creative, your team to get creative, and it will really help illustrate your commitment to putting their ideas into action.
Yes, definitely. I love that too. We've just got a couple of minutes left in this session here. So I want to throw to you guys for any final words of advice as, we're challenging those on the call to go out and, observe and listen to the students in their schools. But I'll pass it to you first, Sam. Any final words of advice?
Sure. I just think that, this can seem very intimidating, particularly if seeing the design process that I put up there. And I don't want it to be intimidating. It's just, trying to get started. Once you kind of have an initial conversation under your belt, it's a lot easier to kind of understand how this all will come together. But you've got to take the first step, and I encourage you all to do that.
Yeah, I love that. Always, when you take that first step, it's easier than you think it's going to be. And that first step can sometimes be the scariest one or the most unknown.
I will also mention that if you have a relationship with a Share a Strength or No Kid Hungry staff member, that they can also be thought partners for you, and also in some cases extra capacity to kind of come and do a listening session for you. So keep that in mind as well.
Yes, we love those opportunities. Yes, so anyone on the call, if you do want to engage with us more, you can get our panelists information, mine as well, on the attendee hub, and we will share that also with this recording after the event. Ria, any final words of advice for our audience here today?
I think as much as you might be afraid of students, they're afraid of us. That's very general, but I do think that sometimes Sam kind of said the word too, right? Like, it's intimidating to go to students and ask for this feedback, because sometimes you're not able to implement all of it, or maybe they might be really harsh. I am afraid of teenagers walking down the street. To have them in a group talking to you about something they may or may not dislike, I think that can be really intimidating and hard for people who, everyone on this call, everyone who's attending, everyone's trying their best, right? That's always the case. And so getting feedback and hearing it in different ways, especially if you haven't done that before, can be really intimidating and scary. But I think, again, addressing the power dynamics, thinking about an inclusive model, thinking about how can you build student equity in your programs, and make sure it is something that you are in it together and it benefits both parties. I think really addressing that and trying to build that inclusive space is worth it. I think it is worth it every single time. And like I said, every single time I've been in a listening session, to have a student directly say I felt heard, or thank you so much for taking your time to talk to me, that appreciation in itself, it does translate to program participation. When they're thinking about going through the line next time, they're going to be oh, they talked to me about this, or they, I got to provide input on that, or things like that. And that just builds trust in the program and within as partners. And I think that is worth it every time. And it can be really scary at the start, but I think that's why me and my colleagues are here. I love talking to students. So if you let me come into your school, that is the highlight of my job, is to just walk in and talk to students. So I'm happy to help facilitate, or I'm happy to help walk through the resource and make it applicable to your school specifically, and things like that. It really, once you get the hang of it, it's such a joy to be able to do that, and it's something unique and really fulfilling. And so don't let that initial fear get to you. And also if there are tough conversations, but every conversation is important. So I hope that is helpful.
Definitely. And I think, that call, we keep saying we are here to be resources to everyone on this call. I hope this session has been, encouraging for those that are interested in taking that first step into youth engagement in their cafeterias. And we will always be here to be a resource. And we're really excited to kind of walk the journey with you. But thank you so much, Sam and Ria, for sharing this with our audience. I know we were very excited to hear about these two resources that you guys built. So thank you so much for the day, and I hope everyone joins us in the sessions happening right after this. So have a good rest of your day, everyone.